Hello and welcome to the Soulpreneur Journey podcast. Laura here. I'm super excited today because I have Dicken Bettinger with me today. And Dicken has been an inspiration in my life and those that I love. So I'm going to allow the conversation to unfold naturally. Dicken and I are going to have a little bit of a discussion about entrepreneurship, insight, three principles, and how it's helped him in his journey, how it's helped me. And we are just going to allow the conversation to unfold because one of the things that I love to do is to teach by example. And that's one of the things that I teach my students and my clients is to just allow something to unfold naturally. We don't have to know everything. And so that's part of the excitement today is just letting it flow. So I'm going to hand it over to Dicken just to say hi and introduce yourself for us.
Thanks, Laurie. Hi, I'm Dicken Bettinger. Um, I started my career teaching high school, and I had so many kids coming to talk to me about their problems. I got interested in what I could learn to teach my students that would help them have an easier time of things. And then I went and got my master's in counseling psychology in the education department. Then I got my doctorate in the education department, um, and I started learning. And I started early on in my career. I focused on mental health and psychological well-being, and um, then I became a psychologist, and that was 45 years ago.
And you practiced for quite a while. And then can you tell us a little bit about how your journey as a guide for other people has changed because you started off in psychology and getting that education and it sounds like it got heavier as you went, right? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, when I became when I was looking for doctoral programs to train psychologists, almost all of the training programs in psychology focused on mental illness. And so you were right away focusing on what was wrong with people. And the teachers that I had for my master's degree and even in my undergraduate degrees, I was very fortunate to have teachers that were friends and colleagues of Dr. Carl Rogers, who was one of the first American psychologists to start looking at the health in people instead of what was wrong with people. And so I wanted that to be the focus of my doctoral work. And fortunately, I found this wonderful program at Boston University that trains psychologists in the education department. And instead of seeing people as ill, and having illnesses, because when I taught high school, I worked with a lot of troubled kids, but I never saw them as ill. I just saw them as doing the best they could and struggling. And in the education department, they said if someone is struggling, number one is not their fault. Number two, they just haven't learned through insight what they need to learn in order to have an easier time of things. And to this day, I love that philosophical way of looking at people as everybody has health and we're doing the best we can. And through insight, things that we struggled with or were difficult can become easier. Just like if you're learning how to use a computer program, it can seem so complicated and difficult at first. And then you have insights and then it gets easier and easier and easier. And pretty soon it's second nature. And so that's been the approach that I've used in my work with people from the get-go.
I love that, especially when you say, like, you use the analogy of a computer program, because whenever we're learning a computer program, we're not looking at all the stuff we don't know how to do yet, right? We learn the one thing that we do need, and then it kind of expands on what we do know, right? We're not always focusing on what we don't know. We're looking at the wellness
Yes.
of the learning.
Well, when I was studying math early on, I had a math book, and at the back of the book, it showed you how to do correctly all of the problems. So you could try and do it, and then you could check yourself. But at the back of the book, they didn't have all the things you did wrong.
Yeah.
So I don't want to focus on all the things people have done wrong in their life. I want to help them access greater and greater levels of well-being, and then anything they do will get easier. Any
Yeah.
problem will be easier to deal with.
And it sounds like this is applicable to every area of life. And we're going to go into a little bit more of that in detail. Um, but you're right. Why would we focus on all the things that we don't know or all the things that we're doing wrong? Like that has got to lead us to some terrible experiences of ourselves and the world around us if that's all we're focusing on.
I'm thinking of a great story. Tiger Woods was a great golfer and was being interviewed one time, and he had a particular tournament, and for whatever reason, his putting was really off. So they interviewed him afterwards, and they said, "Tiger, what happened to your putting game?" And he said, "No, it's been really off, and I'm going to go back and look at tapes." And they said, "Oh, you're going to look at the tapes of this tournament, all the putts you didn't do well." He said, "Oh no, I wouldn't look at tapes that I wouldn't do well. I want to go back at looking at tapes of when I was doing well." And
Yeah.
it's the same kind of understanding is people are motivated to learn when they're focused on well-being. And when you're focused on what you're doing wrong or what hasn't worked, it becomes more and more discouraging, disheartening. And even people can even lose hope that they feel like they're broken, they're damaged, and that there's something fundamentally wrong with them, which is not the case.
Yes, but it is common for so many of the modern methods to point that out, right? So they're going to professionals in some arenas and they're just getting reiterated what they are already thinking of themselves, right? By some of the industries that are essentially set up to try to help these people in any area of life. They're kind of continuously focusing on what's wrong.
Well, that's been the history of
Mm.
psychology for the last 200 years. Um, the very beginning of like in America, the first true American psychologist was William James, and he talked about how experience is created by thought and consciousness. But thought and consciousness are intangible forces. And after a while, people sort of said that's too intangible. We need to focus on what we can see, what's visible. So the history of psychology is focusing on content of experience. And so it's always, the field of psychology is always focused on thought content, feeling content, or behavioral content. Even Freud was focusing on content. He was focused on unconscious stored memory and thought content. And he called that depth psychology, but it's just actually now we see it as surface, it's just stored memory. Then you had the reaction against the Freudian work of constantly going back into the past and free associating and bringing up memory content that was painful. Uh, so then you had uh, um, it shifted away from that into the existential humanist, focusing on feeling content and trying to get in touch with painful feelings and cathartic them. And then you had the behaviorists react against that. And then you had the cognitive revolution that went back to thought content and reframing and restructuring already created thought content. But you'll notice, Laura, all of that is the past. It's what's already been created. So he'd say, what happened yesterday, 5 years ago as a child? What did you feel? What did you think then? What did you do? How did you behave? How did you behave yesterday? It's always only dealing with content and the past.
So it's taking
And
people into that story.
it takes people into the story of what didn't work in the past rather than what are your resources right now. Past doesn't exist anymore except in memory. There is no past other than memory. How are you using your resources available to you right now? And what are those resources? That's a whole different question. So after I had been practicing for 10 years, Laura, I met a man named Sidney Banks, and he had had a profound realization of the nature of the mind, not intellectual realization, but a true, insightful realization. Some people might call it an enlightenment experience. I asked him once, since he was my mentor for 23 years, was it a near-death experience? And he said, no, in a near-death experience, you go partway into that light and then come back. I went all the way through. It was like a death experience. And he realized the true source of all psychological experience. And he said, it's quite interesting is that psychology just innocently got involved in what was already created. And he said, I became interested in what was doing the creating. For example, with a computer, you could be very interested in circuit boards and the workings and mechanics of a computer, but it won't even work if it's not plugged into a power source. It doesn't work. It wouldn't be called the computer. And so some people might be interested in the computer, and other people are going, what's the power source that runs computers, TVs, radios, lights, and explore that? And it's looking in a completely different direction. It's not looking at what's already been created. It's looking at right now, what's the power that's creating your experience? And you start to look in that direction as we can talk about. It's remarkable how it gives people hope. It helps people to create a much more healthy version of themselves rather than stay focusing on what didn't work in the past. And it's a whole new paradigm for the field of
Mm.
uh, science, the field of psychology, and it's in perfect alignment with what the physicists are discovering about the nature of uh, the the creative process in life and the creations that come out of that process.
Yeah, it sounds so simple too, because when we're going through anything in life, whether we're learning to bake, we don't always know what's going wrong with our recipes, but we can continuously look at what's going right and make better recipes based on that. When we're growing a pumpkin, we take seeds from the biggest one, and we're replicating those crops and
I have a
but we're
friend.
not
I have
focusing
a
on
friend who
like,
does that.
yeah.
Growing huge, record-breaking pumpkins. It's constantly, like you said, it's a beautiful metaphor of taking the best of the best and building on it.
Yeah, because could you imagine if he took all of the ones that didn't do so good and started inspecting those and cutting them open and trying to figure out why, right? He would be wasting so much of his time and his energy and his talent instead of just going
Yeah.
with what he already know what he his wellness, right? That wellness there.
Yes. Yes.
So it seems so simple. So I wonder, like, in humanity, how we kind of get things backwards because we feel like there's something to fix. There's something wrong with us. There's something broken in us. And you talk about I know you're a psychological educator, but also like when we self-diagnose ourselves, like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me, right? We don't need a
Yeah.
professional to tell us that there's something that we need to fix, in quotes. So we're always making up these stories about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I want to mention your book briefly because I want to explain the story a little bit of as how I met you, which was I heard your name around our community a few times. I went on and listened to an audio of you, and then I ended up getting your book on Amazon, and it's called Coming Home for everybody listening. And I read the book, and it's so simple the way that we can actually heal and be guided in life and live a rich, profound experience without carrying all of this stuff with us. Um, and I actually have probably read your book about 3 times. It's also available on Audible, by the way, so you can listen to an audio version of it. And the way, so much of what you're saying right now, the simplicity of it, you explain that and you kind of you tell it in a little bit of stories and some questions and whatnot, but also from some of what Sydney Banks taught you from
Yes.
his, from your interactions with him and some of your experiences. So do you want to tell us a little bit about first I'd like a little bit of backstory if you'd want to share what inspired you to write this book.
I wanted to write this book for 20 years. But when you're talking about the formless, intelligent, conscious, creative dimension of life, no words can ultimately describe that infinite field of energy in which we are living. And so it's very easy to intellectualize it, which I could have done. I mean, I got my doctorate because I was good at doing that. So I could have done that early on after I met Sydney Banks because I was having insights that were changing my life, changing my relationship to my children and to my wife, changing the whole paradigm by which I worked as a psychologist changed. And I was getting remarkable results compared to my traditional way of working with people. And so I could have written a book at that point, but I wanted my book to be grounded in my own depth of experience. And so I waited until I felt that I could more accurately represent what I had been learning from my mentor, Sydney Banks. And I'm glad I waited. Uh, it was an exciting process then to share what I had directly and experientially realized rather than just intellectually explaining Sydney Banks and his teaching and its relevance for humanity.
Yeah. Well said. And then I agree with you. It is really hard to articulate the formless, right? Because Sydney Banks, and just from what I see, he had that experience and then he put it into the best structure that he could in order to share it, right? And that's where the three principles was born. And that's how we can kind of articulate as the years go by, like this is the three principles, mind, consciousness, and thought. This is how we are built as human beings. But
Yes,
really, like in my experience too, it really is like the formless nature of all things. And it's that space beneath the intellect where we can feel a difference. And you can't always put those feelings into uh, intellectual language that's like, oh, I feel that. But you did really well in your book. And that's one of the reasons why I love to read it over and over and just kind of read parts of it and reflects is because I do get that feeling
Mm.
of our formless nature and our true nature, right? Like what it
Wonderful.
is that we are
Wonderful.
underneath. Yeah, what we are underneath all of that.
I mean, intellectually, I was understanding that because I could read about, as I have often, about how physicists are now describing reality, and especially quantum physicists in quantum physics. And they'll say the foundation of life is there's an infinite field of quantum energy. And out of that quantum field, it creates temporary condensations of energy that become subatomic particles that come and go in that field of energy. And the quantum physicists will say there's an intelligence in that field because it knows not only how to create form or life, but it also knows how to operate it. And then they'll say there's consciousness in that field. It's a conscious field because every single cell created in the universe has awareness because it's made of a conscious energy. So an amoeba, I studied that in biology, will respond to stimuli directly with an intelligence. It knows how to find food and it knows how to move away from adverse environmental situations and toward more positive ones. And um, that intelligence is built into everything that's created. And then the quantum physicists say it's a field of infinite potential and possibility. So when I worked in big companies filled with engineers, they love thinking of the mind as a field of infinite, boundless possibility. And that they began to discover for themselves that when you get really quiet beyond the limitations of our own intellect, you can get totally new and fresh insights and inspiration that's created fresh, and that there's no end to that capacity. So, this is why they can say people use such a small percentage of the true capacity of their mind, not just their brain, but their mind, which is what's the mind is, the brain is like the computer. The mind is what programs and generates new and fresh information into that computer structure. It's like the electricity that's the power source of that energy so that it can run and operate.
Yeah, tapping into that infinite potential. And I love that you mentioned quantum physics because I actually studied physics and quantum physics before I stumbled on to the principles. And so by the time I found the principles, I wasn't even intellectualizing it because I knew that I had stepped into the energy of what I had been learning in quantum physics.
Yeah,
The whole time I was like, oh, this is what it feels
that's
like.
right.
That's the intellectual aspect of it, right? And then this is what it feels like. And in my teachings and some of the stuff that I'm constantly pointing my students and my clients back to where to find that insight because it
Yes.
is like
Yeah.
it's valuable in every area of life, not just psychology. I feel like psychology is one of the easiest, right? Because there's no structure to what we're teaching and when with the feeling and the insight because it's just our spiritual nature. So really there's no way for me to say spin around and stand on your head 3 times and you'll get there. Like there's no formula to feel this, right? But in, business, marketing, some of the more tangible, practical skills, it can be a little bit different when infusing this practice. But that's what I love to teach people is to,
Uh,
you know, look for your insight so that you can gain that guidance to take the next step in your business or marketing or your relationship or whatever it is that you're working on and here's how to look for that. Well, here's where to look for that and to kind of create the space for that
yeah.
insight. So, can you share a little bit about? insight? I know we talk about this, and if I could just wave a magic wand, I would just give everybody the gift of like, here's the space that you need so that you can begin to notice it, right?
Well, Sid was very good at pointing people toward that space so that it seemed like it was accessible for any human being because we already have access to that deeper intelligence. I mean, let's just start with some ordinary examples of how that intelligence breaks through into human consciousness. You look at, you can't remember somebody's name, you go through your Rolodex, you can't remember the name, you stop thinking about it, you get quiet, you disengage from your intellect, and all of a sudden the name pops into your head. Let's take another ordinary example. You're driving your car. You obviously use your intellect to learn a lot of information about how it works. But when you're driving, you're not relying as much on your intellect as you are this deeper intelligence. So, for example, while you're driving, you're going really fast with a heavy, heavy object under you, past other objects going really fast. And your hands are constantly making adjustment, but you're not using your intellect to figure out, should I move it an inch now? Now do I move it back or do I wait a second? And you're constantly making life and death decisions because we're connected to an intelligence that doesn't rely on the intellect. It can utilize the intellect, but it doesn't rely on it. When I played sports, when I got out of my head, all sports people know this now. Every coach, every professional athlete, you get out of your head, and they would talk about being in the zone. What's the zone? You just know what to do and where to go and how to do it. You have good game sense, and it's not intellectual process. The You have a problem and it seems insolvable. And you go to sleep and you wake up in the morning, you go, oh, I know what we can do. I mean, these are just some ordinary examples of, but there is something we can learn that will help us have greater access to that. For example, if you want to catch the bus, you can just stand out on the street and hope it'll stop for you. Or you can go to a bus stop. And if you know where the bus stop is, you're much more likely to catch it. So, what's the bus stop for human beings? I mean, I taught this. I worked 16 years in companies, and I taught this to business executives, leadership teams, uh, uh, staff development, how to use your mind more wisely. Because most of the people I was working with in business had incredibly well-developed intellects. In other words, they knew how to use their computer to access already known information. They were really good at it. I didn't have to teach them how to use their computer. But they often would then misuse their computer and try and get it when they wanted to get new and fresh ideas or answers to problems or how to deal with somebody who's being difficult. You can't find those answers in a computer. You don't find wisdom in a computer. You don't find feelings that uplift, and you don't find inspiration in the computer. You find stored information that's already known. And so the general teaching for anybody who wants to tap into a deeper dimension of their mind, to tap into wisdom that helps guide you through any difficult situation or circumstance, is you have to temporarily close your laptop, like we tell our teenagers. You've had enough screen time. Come back to the real world. Stop thinking about what's on your screen and let your mind be open to new and fresh. If you spend all of your time thinking about things, you'll start to experience greater anxiety. This is what happened to teens during the pandemic. More anxiety, more depression. Many teenagers became suicidal. And it was because they were constantly thinking about what was on their screens. They had no time for their mind to be open and relaxed to thinking that creates feelings of well-being and new and fresh ideas that can guide them through life effectively. So they'd lose their common sense.
Which
So,
actually, yeah, that makes sense.
so there is the bus stop is this is how Sid would say it. You have to go beyond your conceptual mind to the space of pure presence in order to access this spiritual dimension of our being. You have to go beyond the words, all the words, your words, somebody else's ideas, your beliefs, your concepts, just temporarily to the space inside of us that's before already known content. You could say step into the unknown. In problem solving, it's an enormous part of problem solving. Use your intellect to think about the problem, pull together the information, organize it, process it. Absolutely. But then that's the limit of what your intellect can do. Now close your laptop. And they call it brainstorming. And you can predict that if people understand what brainstorming is, they will get new and fresh thinking. So Sid would say, if you can take one little step beyond your precious thought system, just for a moment, he says, you must then experience something more beautiful. You'll start to feel better and you'll start to know more intuitively. And you'll get new and fresh thinking, which is the source of all creativity. But it's built into every single one of us. Every human being is built that in a quiet mind they will start to feel better and know more intuitively what to do, how to deal with things, how to solve problems. So there is, in a sense, a science. It's a different science than we used to because all science has been focused on the known, the past, information, processing. We've gotten very good over time utilizing our computer. But as soon as we misuse our computer, Laura, this is the cool part. What a beautifully designed system. As soon as we misuse the computer, we'll feel tension or stress. It'll feel hard. It'll feel difficult. We'll struggle. We'll feel confused. We'll have doubts. We'll have worries. We'll get upset. That's a signal. You've had enough screen time. You're looking for answers where you can't find it. Close your laptop.
Yeah. And
Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, what one of the things like I so many thoughts are coming to mind is like first, no wonder why children in school would get so stressed out when they're out of school and they've been trained to work with that intellect 24/7 memorizing and
Yes.
and then all of a sudden they have an empty space there and that part of them hasn't been nurtured. So they're going into worry
Yes.
and fear and stress, right? So in a way, I feel like a lot of individuals, whether they're in a corporate job or whatever they're doing, if they're utilizing their intellect on a regular basis, that is their go-to operating system. That is
Yes.
their, the little
Yes.
tiny Apple computers we used to have, like that is their, or maybe even their, what is the dial up, right? Maybe using dial up, like that is their dial up. It can only take them so far. But when we're able to access, free energy or, wireless, and we are tapped into that system, I think quantum
Yes.
physics, every spiritual teacher is constantly pointing to exactly what you're talking about, right? And we found a way to articulate it. But
Yes.
but like it really does feel like you're tapped into an online system. And the principle that did that for me was mind because I had understood consciousness and thought very well. I had gone through PTSD, so I was able to write down my thoughts when I was okay and when I wasn't. And I was like, there's some fishy stuff going on here, right? The light was either on or it was off. So I was able to look at that deeply. But we're able to tap into, or when I was able to tap into mind, I realized like, oh, here's the insight that is healing me. Oh, here, like it literally took me into an online platform to where I was connected, even though I wasn't disconnected. I had just lost my awareness of connection, right? I lost my feeling of connection because I just wasn't noticing it. I was noticing all the things that were wrong with me. So once I realized that mind is something that's running through me and you and everything, and, like we talked about how science has proven this, it's a different playing field. It's like we are on a different, feels like we're on a different stage in life. We're not playing small anymore. We're not on the little tiny Apple computer with dial up, and it's above, anything I expected. So I like to point out, in psychology, when we're finding our wellness, and I want to ask you a question too, but when in psychology, when we're finding our wellness and we're looking at how we are well, and that's manifesting more and more, because we know what manifesting is, right? What you focus on grows. So that makes sense. And then if we're focusing on our intellect and trying to get our intellect or our ego to figure out how to create something, like that can be a misuse, especially when we have steam coming out of our ears because we can't figure out how to build a business, right? Um, but what is your insight as to, and I know what my thoughts are, but what is your insight for those who are utilizing their creativity in business? Maybe as I like to say that business is an art, right? Because we are all artists and creators. So when someone's building any kind of business, not just like a coaching business or like, you know, like really anything. And it's something that they're passionate about and they feel aligned with to bring into creation. I always love how we're bringing things through our energy system into creation. And that intellect and the intellect and the insight, how do you begin to differentiate between what the ego is telling you versus your wisdom versus your intuition? Like what advice would you give to entrepreneurs that are stressing out about how to make things work and they're looking everywhere outside of them to solve a problem?
I've worked with many companies over the years. One the biggest company I worked with was the third largest defense contracting company in the world, multi-billion-dollar company, literally. And I worked with the president, his staff, his team, people under him. At one point, I did trainings that ran down through um, whole branches of his company. And they often had seemingly insolvable problems. Let me tell a story that I think would answer your question better than just talking about it. I worked with a man who taught advanced theoretical physics at MIT. Perhaps the most IQ-wise, the most intelligent person that I'd have ever met. But having a high IQ doesn't mean that you know how to access your creative potential. You often say, this guy is really smart. He has no common sense. His kids called him Attila the Hun because he would be so harsh, and he would be harsh with people at work. And he could not suffer fools, which was anybody who didn't have as high an IQ as he did. And he tried to solve all their unsolvable problems only utilizing his intellect. And then he learned about the principle of mind, that we're connected to a deeper intelligence, that throughout the course of history in every culture, there have been people who have tapped into a deeper dimension of mind, and they call that intelligence wisdom. And it's called wisdom for a purpose, because it not only brings us new and fresh creative thought, but it brings us what we need to deal with whatever we're struggling with. And so a huge part of my teaching in companies is how thought creates our stress. And if you don't understand that, you'll think work is creating your stress. And then you're a victim of circumstance. And so it's very empowering. Very quickly, people in business would become more resilient. They'd experience less and less stress. And when they did, they would get over it very quickly. But that wasn't the whole package. Then they had to learn about there's another way to utilize our mind, which includes the intellect, but is more than the intellect. And so I would teach them about wisdom and how we're all connected to this deeper intelligence. And in quiet moments, any human being can access new and fresh thinking that's wise, that's helpful, that can solve problems. That's really where problems get solved. In other words, we can think we don't know the answer and be stuck on it for years, and somebody can come in who's wide open to possibilities, even if they're from outside the field, and solve the problem. Cindy Banks once solved a problem that the U.S. Navy could not solve, and he was a ninth grade educated welder. Really, honestly, true story. True story. They hired him to come in to consult. uh, so this friend of mine, this man that I worked with for many years and supervised, over time, he changed so dramatically because he found a balance between intellect and wisdom. And he stopped being a harsh authoritarian leader. And he began to be someone who loved collaborating with people who knew about accessing wisdom. So, along with my help and with his help, we trained his team. And he used to say, I was a bird who had two wings, but I was only using my intellectual wing, and I got pretty good at getting off the ground and moving around. He said, but what you've helped me learn is to have a balance between intellect and wisdom. And so now I have both wings, and things become fun and easy as we try to solve these insolvable problems. So he got to the point with his team, he'd tell the president of the company, give me your insolvable problems. And I'll take my team into a room and I'll close the door and just send in food, and we'll find an answer that you'll be satisfied with. He was so confident that wisdom can provide us with new and fresh thinking that is necessary and helpful for solving any problem. So this guy was an inspiration. And his kids, personal side of it, because he learned to utilize he began to access more and more of the innate feelings of well-being. When your head clears, you feel better, you feel more peaceful, you feel happier, you feel more loving, you feel more connected. And he became a completely different husband and father, and he became a completely different boss at work, and he became one of the best collaborators. So he didn't throw his intellect away, but he saw the limitations of his intellect, and he began to rely heavily on accessing this deeper intelligence we call wisdom.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story. And it just goes to show how the intellect, I like to call it a really good executor because it does help you, right? It's necessary in order
Yeah,
to do
absolutely.
the doing, right? Like your insight and being can give you the ideas and the insight as to what to do and how to navigate, but the intellect is a really good executor. So I feel like plugging everybody back in. That's what I'm constantly going through. So if it doesn't matter like what kind of business someone's building, I'm like, just plug yourself in and you'll find your answers. Plug
Uh,
learn skills, sure, right?
Love that.
Take or
Yeah, I
leave
love
it,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Because there's not one way to do anything. And that's actually a misconception that I see with a lot of entrepreneurs too. They're like, well, I want the one size fits all 3-step model that's going to take me from here to here in 90 days, right? And it's like, well, that might exist and it might work for you, but at the end of the day, you're going to get exhausted and lose your passion and you're because it's not part of that. We can try to align with something that's not meant for us or not part of our heart, right? But it's not going to last very long if we're not putting our love into it. So yes, there might be temporary solutions, but they're not going to be sustainable unless you're building a business or a life that really lights you up and gives you passion, right? And that's what I tell people. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. I'm not the judge of what you do or what you create. I'm not the judge of what you bring into form. Just, do it with your heart and plug yourself in so that you can be guided. Because when we go back to talk to universal mind, it is that online system, and I feel like I could feel it working even between this conversation with you and me. Like I don't know why I mentioned pumpkins. I don't know, it's right, like but like there's some information that is in the ether, in the field, and it's
Yeah.
kind of like, you'll even say something that just passes through my mind. And I'm like, okay, I know what that is. That's universal mind and play, right? And we're on a different playing field. But I really do feel like moving into like a newer, Eckhart Tolle talks about the new earth, right? We're bringing new things through us and to form new school systems, new businesses, new support systems, new structures. I really do feel like that is going to require just someone leading with their heart and being plugged in so that they're getting that
Yes.
information from universal mind so that they know where to go. And without it, it's just really hard and it doesn't work. Right.
It's just so hopeful for people that any one of us can learn what happens and how it works that we use our intellect wisely. Because you can think about problems that can be very helpful, and past experience and information is enormously helpful. It's thank God I have my computer to Google stuff.
Yeah.
It's fun to get helpful information, but you can't solve problems of love or complexity or life with information. If you have a smoker, you can give them all kinds of information on how their lungs are turning black and they're going to die, and they don't stop smoking until they have an insight about that helps them move in a healthy direction. Without that insight, people don't change. And it's the same with this is we're built to have insights. And so the principles help orient us so that we know where to look to get plugged back in. So it's science. It's a biofeedback system literally created by life, by nature, by this deeper intelligence, so that when you use your intellect wisely, it feels good. It does. I love thinking about things. I love planning. I love imagining based on what I know. But I can easily get out of balance if that's all I'm doing is I'm in my head all the time. And so I need to find balance. Einstein talked about this all the time, all the time. He understood that in a quiet mind, you find inspiration, motivation, clarity, perspective, common sense, solutions to problems, creative thought, new and fresh thinking, everything that ultimately human beings thrive on and are nourished by are available to every human being because it's built into the system. It's a dimension that can't be damaged because it's not physical. It's what runs, creates, operates the physical. And so it's a very, very helpful. So I've taught this to people in prisons, and they become healthier than most people outside of prison. People in prison saying, I found my freedom in prison. I found my well-being in prison. I can live in feelings of peace and happiness and joy. I've regained my resilience. So people learn about the principle of thought. They start catching themselves caught up in thinking that's creating their stress, keeping it alive, keeping it going, and they go, why would I keep thinking about this if I'm creating it? And that's how people become more resilient. We become more like we were when we were children running around playing, right? So, and then we learn about, we can become aware of the quiet behind our intellect that's always here. And then we can become aware of in that quiet space, when any of us are in that quiet space of presence, there's a feeling to presence that's uplifting, nourishing. And when people are in a quiet mind and a beautiful feeling, they're at the bus stop. They're wide open. They're plugged in. They're wide open now for wisdom, bringing new and fresh perspective, new and fresh insights. People have insights that jump their overall level of well-being because now they know where to look to find feelings of well-being and feelings that uplift and thinking that's helpful, new and fresh, guide that will guide us. And it almost turned it into a formula. You have to realize two things to be able to live a balanced life. You have to understand how the mind works to create experience from the inside out. And if you realize that, you'll gain enormous resiliency and stop feeling like your feelings are being created by things in the physical world outside of you, that out of your control. You'll become empowered in a new and fresh way because you'll be able to take full responsibility for your own experience. And then he said the second thing, let go of your thinking anytime, anywhere to access this other dimension. You have to go beyond the words, beyond the concepts, beliefs, temporarily set them aside, come back to the now. There's a quiet that you're looking for. And in that quiet, a deeper feeling of aliveness, connection. And then in that feeling, there's a knowing that will guide you. And people already experience this, but they don't know that that's what's happening. We drive a car, we don't know, oh my God, I can't believe how wisdom is moving my hands. We walk across the room and our legs keep moving without us thinking about it, and we avoid bumping into furniture. Oh my God. And then you start seeing it everywhere. You start understanding it's always there. So the oldest metaphor in psychology is we get caught up in thought that limits, that's contaminated thinking because it creates this stress, upset, unhappiness, confusion. That's the clouds. When the clouds part, there's the blue sky of pure consciousness, of clarity, of presence. And then there's the sun, which is a metaphor, a symbol that's been used in every culture for centuries, the inner light that shines through the darkness of our contaminated intellectual thinking, our judgments, our shoulds, our expectations, our negative thoughts about life, about problems, about ourselves. thoughts of limitation. I can't do this. This is too hard. This is impossible. They create this feeling. And when you realize that and you fall out of it, you fall out of limitation. You open
Yeah.
up to possibility. You're plugged back in, as you say. So Sid would say, it's all thought, and listen quietly until your mind quiets down for the feeling of aliveness and connection that's always inside you. And then trust where it takes you. And anyone can learn that. I've taught that to 4-year-olds. I've taught that to 96-year-olds. I taught that to people in business, in prisons, in communities that are struggling, people with addictions, people with mental health illness labels. Uh, we all work the same way because we're all connected to that formless, creative, conscious, wise dimension.
Yeah. And we're all, and in that sense, we're all one. So we all have access to it. There's not one of us here. I remember someone told me that I don't have guidance. And I said, there's nothing that I have that you don't. So,
That's
but
so
yeah,
lovely, lovely, lovely.
yes, like what you're speaking of, Dickon, like you put it so eloquently in your words and the way that you're able to teach it. And, hopefully, I think we all explain it differently, right? But like I can feel that you're tapped into that source. And we do talk about the feeling a lot because it is the best indicator of
It sure is.
like what feeling are you in? That's going to tell you. And if you're in that good, beautiful feeling, that's the feeling of being online. But I wanted to mention that I wrote a draft of a book once. It started as a blog post and it was called The Train Station because in my experience with PTSD, I first noticed, like I said, that I was either offline or offline. I was either okay or in a spiral because of the nature of PTSD. And that lasted for about 5 years. And when I was able to see that there was a whole other side of me that was okay, I decided to, how can I experience more of that part of me? Because that part of me is okay, right? And as I accessed more and more of my wellness, I manifested more and more of that. And luckily to this day, I don't have any symptoms at all that I used to have.
Mm,
But when I wrote that blog post slash book, it became obvious to me that there's a part of me that is uh, present and like a powerful pillar of like being. And if I could see everything around me as moving planes, trains, automobiles, and I was like sitting at a train stop, that I could decide whether or not I wanted to get on a thought train. That's what I would call it back then, a thought
yes.
train. Do I want to get on that train of thought to take me to this city where I'll probably be for a few days? So every time that I noticed like the thoughts starting that weren't serving me, I did recognize them as a misuse of thought. I was like, well, why would I get on that train? That sounds like a terrible trip, right?
Beautiful.
So, yeah, so I noticed that I had more of choice than I thought I had. And to this day, I think we all tend to misuse thought a little bit because that's part creative energy is thought, right? We could use it for good. We can make it mean something it doesn't. We can give anything meaning that we want. So we have a free will in that sense. But now I call them thought castles, where it's like, what kind of castle do we build, because it's part of the human condition, right? Is to do this and move into the thought castle and explore it and experience it, see what there is to learn there. And then we can constantly break them down and notice that, like you said, the sun is always there. The sun doesn't move. Even through the clouds, the sun is always there. It's always shining. And that wisdom and that
Yes.
source and that
Always, always.
solidness of us. Yeah, always there for all of us, not just you or me or like it's and it's so natural. It's birth. It's a birthright. You're
Yes.
born, you get it. It's just how we're built, right? But can you elaborate a little bit on if someone, like when I was in PTSD, I didn't know it until after I was out of it, right? And I do see that people build thought castles and they're there and then they come to a coach or they come to someone to say, here's a problem in my life. And they realize that it was all an illusion that they built. And they were like, oh, okay, I'm fine now. Right. I'll break that
Uh,
down. That was a fun trip. But what would you say to someone who would like to gain more awareness on when they're building these thought castles, right? Like they're
uh,
building this illusion for them to live in. Because for me, I still do that from time to time, but I've gotten so good at not crawling into the castle. Like I'll build it, look around and leave because I don't want to, I'd
uh,
rather be, you know, just standing at the bus stop or whatnot, right? So, what are your thoughts or your insights on when we do catch ourselves in these thought patterns or thought castles or misuse of thought?
Let me come back to how simple Sid Banks would make this, because there's 1,000 different ways in which people create thought castles, and then it turns into behavior that becomes problematic for that person or people around them. Um, so you have the diagnostic manual that I used to use, and it's huge now. There's ever more, every year, more labels on what's wrong with people. Sid Banks says there's only one thing wrong with people ever. It's normal to have shifts in the quality of our thinking during the day. It's what we call moods. So we're always thinking, and it's normal to go up and down. It's normal to have low moods where your thinking becomes more judgmental, more filled with more fear, doubt, worry, upset. That's normal. Happens to everybody. Either you understand how that works or you don't. If you don't, when you start having a low mood, you'll start thinking about what you're thinking. Oh, this is impossible. I can't do this. Can you believe that so and so made me do this? I can't. This person is always doing that. And then we think about it and then we try to analyze our way to answers. No one can analyze their way to wisdom. No one can think their way to wisdom. So innocently, all of us at times get caught up in thought moods, and then we think that what we're thinking and feeling is real. It's reality. Now, we do the same thing at night, and we have dreams, and they're just created by the content of our thinking in the moment. And we can have nightmares, which is where we have negative thought content, if you will, that while we're in it seems real. And so we're running away from a bear and we're terrified and it's about ready to catch us. And we wake up from that nightmare and we go, thank God it was just a bad dream. It's just thought. It's only thought. That's all it is. It's not reality. Well, we do the same thing during the day. We have daymares. And learning these principles, when I start feeling tension, stress, or upset, it's a gift. It's letting me know I'm holding onto thoughts and thinking they're true. And all I have to do is realize that, and I'll wake up and let go of those thoughts, and I wake up from the dream. And it's just an illusion. Like you said, it's just a sandcastle. The tide comes in and it washes it away. It doesn't exist when we don't think it into existence and believe it to be true. So in a low state, I can have the thought, I'm not capable of doing this project. This person is screwing everything up. This is horrible. I can't believe this is happening. And then suddenly by the feeling, you can wake up and go, that's just a bunch of low quality thoughts. Why would I hold on to them? Now, one metaphor, because I think metaphors and stories are the best way to learn this. If you put your hand out and I put something too hot, really hot in your hand, an object, and you squeeze it, physically you would suffer. And the longer you held it, the more you would suffer. So there's pain and then there's holding. And the holding leads to suffering. And in all true spiritual and psychological teachings, they say holding on to negative thought creates our suffering. And if you realize that, now you have free will. I've never had a client once when they start realizing that it's thought creating their thought dream, their their daymare, that they don't ask me what are the techniques, how do I let go of this hot thing, what are the 7 steps to success of letting go. They just do this. So Sid Banks would teach us, if you're holding on to thought in a way that's not helpful or healthy, you'll feel tension, stress, or upset. You'll have it. It can lead to any discomfort psychologically. And that's a gift. It's a signal letting you know you're starting to get caught up in thought and holding on to thought in a way that's not healthy. And Sid would say, if you really see it's thought, then it'll bring you right back to the now. And in the now, there's no holding. So, in order to create nightmares, you have to leave the present moment and use stored information and painful memory to create a painful story. And then, when you realize you're doing that, you come back to the now. That thinking always subsides because it's no longer being created, so it no longer exists. It's just a dream. And that's one of the main parts of Sid's teaching. He called it the illusion of thought created experience. Huge. That was really his very first insight before he had his enlightenment experience, is all of my unhappiness, all of my misery, all of my stress, all of my worry, all of my anxiety is just me thinking about things in a way that creates those feelings. And when I wake up to them, they're not in me. They're not part of me. They're no longer being created, so they don't exist. And then he was free of suffering. He still had pain and he still had low moods, but he was free of suffering. He understood the nature of thought created experience. And when we let go of painful thoughts, always, we're built to then this wisdom brings us new and fresh thinking that helps us to feel peaceful or happy or loving.
Yeah, I love that you how you put it that we actually have to leave this present moment right here to
Have
even
to
go
leave
in.
it. Have to leave it. All suffering happens when we're not present. We're thinking about ourselves. We're thinking about our problems. We're thinking about what's wrong. And when we're not thinking about it in the present moment, people go through their ups and downs very gracefully. Example, my 5-year-old granddaughter, I love watching her. Most of the time she's present. So most of the time she's enjoying what she's doing. Most of the time she's playing. Every life is play for her. I know business executives who live at this level of consciousness, who life is enjoyable and work is enjoyable and it's all play and they love it. And then she'll get really upset at something her brother does or says. She'll think about it in a way and start holding on to those thoughts. But because she's more interested in being present and playing, she refuses to hold on to her upset thought. And so in little kids, we call that she's very resilient. Any human being who's struggling has lost their resilience innocently because they leave the present moment often. People who are depressed spend 85% of their time not present, thinking about things in a way that creates their misery. 85%. They're not in the present moment. They're thinking about things with negative, low quality, low mood thinking. And when they start learning that, I can't tell you how many people I've worked with depression, when they start waking up out of those low mood nightmares, they become resilient again. And then they no longer suffer any symptoms of depression or PTSD or panic attacks or behavioral problems. They just are symptomatic of one problem, holding one cure, understanding the nature of thought and understanding the nature of consciousness, understanding the nature of wisdom. It cures any psychological problem. Cures.
It
I've
really
seen it.
does.
I've seen it.
It really does because I experienced it. I remember I would be on the brink of stay present, stay present, stay present, stay present. And then I would move out of presence and I was reliving over and over again
Yes,
emotions and thoughts and situations. And then I would come back to the present again. And then I said, I would say this to anybody. Um, I asked myself, how can I do more of this? And that's when I started martial arts. And that's how I can kind of uh,
yes, yes,
your sports analogy was perfect because using my body kept me present, right? And
yes. That's
and
right. That's right.
yeah, and every time I went into the thinking of how to do a rising block or a kick or something, I would fail. So I realized I had to get my intellect out of the way, and then the more I
Yes,
did that, the more I got used to being present and trusted presence. Right. I think that I didn't trust life. I didn't trust the
yeah,
now moments. I didn't trust, and that's kind of another thing is just for me, it was I didn't know I didn't trust. I didn't know that I didn't even trust it, but I just felt very off put by plugging in. Like I don't want to plug in. Bad things happen, right? As
yeah,
that was what my ego was telling me,
yeah,
but with the now moments, I really love that you mentioned that. We know the power of now and some of those teachings, but
yes,
everything really is in the now. And when we plan things and we're like, I'm going to do this A to Z with my business, it's okay if we can allow it to change in the moment, in the now moment, because everything exists in the now moment, right? So if we're trying to do a timeline on a horizontal level with any area of our life,
yeah,
um, it's more likely that if we're open to flow and flexibility and just plan all you want, but look in the moment for the insight because I feel like the insights are very intelligent, right? Because mind is intelligent. So what you need comes to you. It's not like try these five things and see what works for you. Like an
yeah,
insight is exactly what you needed, right? It's like made
yeah.
to order specifically for you. It's not even an idea and it's not a thought. It's very peculiar and how it's received. So do you want to tell us like what does an insight feel like versus thought versus maybe wisdom, which to me can feel similar to an insight versus just thinking. I think I get a lot that question a lot. And they're like, yeah, I'm having an insight right now. I'm like, no, I think that's an idea, right? So how do you differentiate those?
There's a qualitative difference. First of all, before we even get to insights, I'll get to that very quickly. But at any moment, we're a thought away from the present moment. And there's a quantitative difference between the feeling we're in while we're thinking, preoccupied, the feeling of preoccupation, and the feeling that's there when we let go. And letting go always feels like, uh, feels good right away. Even when we're in a very low mood, if we're chronically thinking about what we're upset about, and then we stop thinking, say our friend comes to the door, we go, oh, hi. See, letting go immediately becomes the doorway to our well-being shining through. So we're always a thought away from the present moment. And only when we're in the present moment do we have the open access to something new and fresh being created because our mind is open and receptive. We're open minded. When we're thinking and using our intellect, often we're closed minded. And there's a value and purpose for that when it's helpful. But as soon as it's not helpful, so you can have two people in a very upset state of mind. One is preoccupied and one is present. Which one's going to have insight? Who do you put your money on?
The presence for sure.
which, which one is going to start back up quicker? You see, there is a science to creativity. My wife's an artist. She does not paint from her intellect, but she uses her intellect to learn all kinds of. She studies with all different great teachers, and but then when she goes to paint, like she'll use photographs as reference. So we'll be driving around in the car and in a moment of presence, you only see beauty when you're present, by the way, not while you're thinking. And she'd go, "Oh, wow." She'd stop and take some pictures, come back, put them around her easel just for reference. But she won't start painting while she's up in her head. She'll listen to music or read poetry or just sit quietly. And she explains to me, Dicken, I'm going to wait until I feel the same intensity of beauty that I felt when I saw this originally. And then I'm going to let that feeling move my hand so that I can literally bring as much of that beauty onto paper so that when people see the painting, their minds will quiet down, they'll experience beauty. And that's what good art does for people. It helps them become really present because there's something beautiful captured on paper. And they can then drop into the state where suddenly they'll go, what a beautiful painting. And you can get tears coming down just looking at beautiful art. I have many times. And so artists who paint from their heart, from inspiration, from deeper feeling, their art has more impact on the viewer than people who just paint from their head. And you can see it's stiff and controlled or just a copy of something, and it doesn't have that same quality and same feeling. So we can tell by the feeling when we're present. You get very sensitive to the quality of feeling you're in because that lets you know the quality of thinking you're in. So you get very sensitive. And when you're in a good feeling, Sid would say, wisdom always comes from a beautiful feeling. It's your mind is wide open and receptive to nature's creative impulse. There's feeling to that.
Yeah. You perfectly explained life as an art, I feel like, when you're talking about your wife painting and how
We're
she
all
paints.
artists. I love that you say we're all creatives. Anybody who says to me I'm not creative, I know they're just spending too much time in their intellect.
Well,
They
you're
don't
well,
balance.
yeah, we're all creators and
Yeah,
we're creating this life, right? We're
yeah,
creating business as an art. And you really just gave me an insight about when we're creating businesses or programs or products or services or whatever we're sharing and how we're serving other people. It's that same feeling that people feel when they come into your presence. And that's kind of why it's hard for me to teach marketing modernly, business modernly in the modern day or the modern way, is because so much of that is an energetic resonance of like what my heart is putting into the art of the business that I'm building, and my heart is going to the into the community that I'm building, and people feel that.
yeah.
And that's where I want people to, like, if they're not passionate about something, like your wife would not be able to just paint a picture because someone told her to, or, follow a 3 step, it's all in that feeling. And I feel like that is
Yes,
creation, right? And
it is. That's the essence of all creative arts. And so any part of our life can become a process of being open-minded to new and fresh creation, no matter what you're doing. Even when I work with accountants, they find a balance between intellect and wisdom. Otherwise, they would not say, I love doing this work. Because in business, I would see people who are preoccupied and overutilize their intellect, their job satisfaction drops off to nothing. They have low job satisfaction. People who find that balance, they love creating. They love getting quiet and being reflective. In business, I would teach the difference between analytic thinking and reflective thinking. Reflective thinking gets the best of both worlds. It gets the best of your intellect because you can think and then you are open and see what new comes and you reflect, oh, I wonder how we might deal with this. And you can see people reflecting. They're just wide open. They run full speed toward a quiet mind so they can get new and fresh thinking. And the higher up you are in a company, the more reflection is required for you to have vision, to be inspiring, to be able to listen deeply to the people in your company, to know how wisely to respond to market trends and to changes in the company. And more and more is it's required of people in higher positions. And sometimes people just haven't had the opportunity to learn where to look to find that balance. And now people like you and I can directly point people toward where to look to have a higher quality life at work, at home, and in your business.
Yeah, and in relationships in every area of life.
Every area, every
S-
every area. Parenting. I told you,
Yes.
changed my parenting completely.
I wish I would have had more education back when I was raising my daughter,
Oh,
because,
I
and
know.
not maybe education, but more awareness into the principles, I'll say.
Me too. Me too.
Because I'm a different person, I'm like, oh, this is what everybody talks about. And, Sydney Banks and you and I, we just have our own ways of being able to articulate it, and in the
Yeah.
hopes of getting that to other people. But it sounds like, you know, we're moving from like a human doing phase. There's that masculine energy of doing, doing, doing. And then there's, the human being, which we are. And it seems like in today's age, we're remembering that being like, oh, we can be in this space. And to me, that used to be secondary, not primary. Doing was primary. And being in this space of presence and now moments for me feels like it's my number one. Like there is no secondary state for me. It's what I prefer. And then reflection is in there, and then insight, right? So that I can kind of, it's like a different pair of glasses, like maybe reflection is one lens and insight is the other. And I'm being and I'm looking through those lenses instead of having intellect and ego, right? Looking through the lenses of
Uh,
intellect and ego. So it seems like we're in this present moment, and we have reflection as insight, like as our go-to partners. And that thinking and
yes.
thought and all the other tools, they're just tools, right? We get to use
Yes.
it however we want, right? We can go into a deep thinking thought train, build a thought castle, decorate the walls, make it up however we want it. But it's all a tool, right? So, like, even the ego, when used properly, is a tool to help us in this physical experience.
Hmm.
Does that resonate with you? Does that sound about
I like
like,
the way Sid says you get really good at going back and forth between being in your intellect and using it wisely, and then knowing when to shift gears and get plugged in and be wide open to a deeper intelligence that brings feelings that uplift and new and fresh thinking. And then you, as Sid would say, they're all connected, so you get the best of both worlds. You become a whole human being. You're not just human, but you're a human being. You're not just a little wave on the ocean or humanness. You're also connected to the ocean, which is your being. So every human being, there's billions of humans, but there's only one being living all of us separately.
that's beautiful?
I love seeing that because then I know we are really the same. We're all connected to the same ocean of wise, aware, creative consciousness. It's all the same field. We come and go within that field. Everything in form is a temporary condensation that goes back into the field of life energy. Energy can't be destroyed, it just changes form, right? So,
Mhm. Wow, that's fascinating. Well, I've had quite a few people that they go into perfection mode. They have the imposter syndrome. They're overthinking, trying to get things right. So I love that this recording will give people an insight, or hopefully just a view of what's possible for them, because I've tried overthinking and it never got me anywhere. I don't know. I actually had to learn something new before I could make it stop, right? Because I didn't know what to replace it with.
Yeah, same here. Same here. Yeah.
Yeah, and same with you talked about feelings of insecurity just being a thought.
Hmm.
And probably I would guess the imposter syndrome is probably an insecurity.
That's all it is. It's just a bunch of thoughts that happen. When we go into a low mood, it's normal to have doubts. But if you think those are true, then you start living in insecurity. You start living in a more fearful space because you don't know you're connected to the power, the creative energy, and the wisdom of the universe. We're not taught that typically.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
now there are programs all over the world that teach this to kids of every age.
yeah, yeah,
Very hopeful.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. No, you're welcome.
Yeah. Well,
It's
Dick, and
been fun.
let's talk a little bit about you, because I know that I did want to mention your book, which I absolutely love, and a lot of the things that we talked about here, you mentioned in your book about daymares, and a lot of
Yes.
the
Yeah, I love
just
those metaphors. They're powerful.
yeah, because I had heard that, and then you hear it again, and then you hear it again, and then you hear it again, and you're like, oh, it took the 10th time personally for me of hearing that sort of analogy for it to really ring true. I'm like, oh, it's 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 still something that I can break out of, and it's not something that I need to believe is true. I think that's where we get really stuck, is that
Yes.
we're believing all of that, or we're judging our thoughts. I judged my thoughts for a long time. I was like, I'm a bad person because I'm thinking that thought. And then I was like, if I just stopped doing that, I'd probably be happier. And I was, right?
Yeah,
So,
unbelievable. That's wonderful. Yeah.
yeah. So yes, your book again is available on Amazon and Audible. It's called Coming Home: Uncovering the Foundations of Psychological Well-Being. And again, this book can help you in any area of life, and just tapping into this, maybe you call it tapping into source, plugging yourself back in, going online, um, raising your consciousness, whatever you want to call it. There is a feeling to it, and his book helps you feel that and experience it and remember it. I do feel like it's a remembering of
Yeah.
like something that's always been there. We've never not had this ability. We're
Beautiful.
just
Beautiful.
rediscovering it.
That's
And
right. That's right. We're not just covering something that hasn't already existed for centuries. It's the source of all life. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So
Remembering.
it's
It
yeah, it's
is.
it's remembering, right? It's just
Uh,
bringing your awareness back to what you already are. And I really love, Dickon, that you said so much of it is in the present moment. When we can stay present and we're in the now,
yeah.
we're like on the highway aligned with the right direction.
One of the ways Sid talked about the now was he called it the state of no thought. And he didn't mean you didn't have any thoughts in your head. It means you weren't paying attention to the content of thought. You were so present. And that you can be in a very low mood and immediately access the state where you're allowing every thought and feeling you're feeling to flow through you. You're like the sky. You stop trying to fix, change, control, stop, improve. You're just present. And when we're present, we have access to flow and we have access to this deeper intelligence. So as soon as people in a low state get really present, they have more common sense on how to not make things worse. They'll go, I think I won't yell at that person right now. I think I'll wait, or I think I'll go for a walk, or even from a low state, an instant of being open-minded helps you have more common sense. It's that immediate. In Seattle, they call it, then the weather, they'll say, you can expect sun breaks today. The clouds are going to part for 1 second and the sun will break through. So,
Yeah.
same in low moods. We can have sun breaks in the lowest of moods if you know where to look.
Yeah, and I like that you call it common sense because it is the
Yeah.
ultimate common sense. You know, we've
Yes.
heard common sense in a negative talk at like, don't you have any common sense? You know, those kind of things when we growing
Yeah.
up and such. But it really is, it just shines light on how available and existing this is for everybody. It's so common and it is a sense that we have built
Yes, it is.
into our existence. It's
Yeah.
not separate from us. It's not, you don't have to do anything special to get there. You don't have to learn anything. You just have to plug, tap into it. And that kind of leads me to the another question that just came to mind is for me, like I said, I had already been through quite a lot on my journey when I heard about mind and it just plugged me in. And I know it's different for everybody, right? So when people attend the conferences that we go to explore this understanding. Some of them, we've heard that it's either a slow drip for some people, drip, drip. You get a little bit more understanding, you get a little bit more. And then for some people, like Sid, it's lightning
Yeah.
fast, right?
Yes.
So, what was
Yes.
your experience of coming into this understanding? Was it quick or was it more slow or what was it for you?
It's I had during the first week of training in the principles, I went to a 5-day program for professionals taught by SID students. And I had 3 insights that changed my psychology practice and changed my parenting. And they were just ordinary insights. I realized it's normal to have low moods. I used to think if I got healthy enough, I wouldn't have them, and that low moods were a sign of not being healthy rather than a natural state. And and then I learned if I become aware of what feeling I'm in and parent from a good mood primarily and do as little as I can from a low mood, that I would become a different parent and a better parent overnight. And I went, oh my God, I don't have to parent the way I was parented. I can parent in a totally new and fresh way. And literally, it took my daughter was turning 14 when I learned this. And boy, at that age, she was feisty and would, to have a low mood discussion with her would be a huge argument and blowout and all kinds of emotions. And then it just eliminated doing that. I just stopped having those conversations. I had the same conversation when I was in a really good state, and it'd be a completely different conversation. So most of my clients, I mean, I still think I was an incremental learner. I didn't have the huge, massive, life-changing overnight every aspect of my life, but very probably right away I did 60% less anxious thinking. That's huge. I mean, that changed my life. I had more hope that when I was in a healthy state of mind, I could do better than when I was caught up in my contaminated thinking. That changed. That changed. My daughter had one insight and she became physically and psychologically a different person overnight. Every single one of our friends said, my God, what happened to Nina? I mean, unbelievable the change. And I have had a number of clients that have had massive overnight changes where they become literally their voice changes, their posture changes, their feeling changes. They become immediately resilient to a degree that's astounding. Um, that's hopeful because that's possible for anyone. But any insight will raise your level of understanding to the degree that you have more well-being than you did before. So I've never seen anybody complain about their insights.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, like I said, when I suppose I could explain it as an insight that plugged me back in. And that was, I felt the energy flowing through me, flowing through the trees, flowing through the ground, flowing through the air,
Yes,
flowing through everything. And I was like, oh, I'm a part of all this. And it's all orchestrated and it's all
yes.
beautiful. Like the trees don't have to ask how to let down their leaves, like
Yeah,
everything.
yeah,
It, it just does it, and I don't have to figure out anything. Was my insight, but my understanding definitely deepens as I learn and explore and talk with other people and teach, the principles
Same
and
here. I've had
so that,
insights this year that have changed everything for me. I mean, there's no limit or end to the potential of the mind because it's an unlimited potential. So it's not like anybody at any age could say, I couldn't possibly have a new thought. We're
oh,
built to have new and fresh thinking. We just need to understand how it works so we can get out of the way and allow that to come through us.
yeah, have an awareness of it. And I do feel like there's some people that are living this reality without even knowing, right? They wouldn't be able to articulate it if they could, but they're already here, experiencing, already home in a sense.
Uh,
But I do feel like that first insight is kind of like it opens the gate to what you've not been noticing, and then you just start to notice more of your power and more of your truth and more of your guidance and more of
yes.
the feelings of coming home,
I
right?
wouldn't keep doing this for 35 years if it didn't help me become more loving and compassionate, because
Same.
that's what I really was looking for all my whole life. That would be my indicator that what I was learning was really helpful. Do I become a better father? Do I become a better husband? Do I become a better teacher? A more loving, kind-hearted, compassionate person? Do I live more in service of others rather than egocentrically, constantly only thinking about myself? Those are the indicators that really have made the difference.
And it's given you a compass, right? Because
Yes,
you've known in your heart what you've wanted and what you want to look at. It seems like it gave you, like, the compass is directly tied into the insight that you need at the exact right moment. And that journey just continues on for all of us.
it
Like, your
does.
compass doesn't stop working, the road doesn't end.
It does.
Um, and I think that's where the word, enlightening came from, is that you're going more into the light. We're just becoming lighter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what it feels like. We're raising in vibration, we're coming more conscious, more aware,
Yes,
more free.
I see that.
Yeah. And definitely more home. So I was always searching for like a feeling of home that I didn't know if it was attached to a place. And this is it. Like, I just want to tell everybody, like, once you tap into this, like I said, Dicken, perfect title for your book, because that's what it felt home. That's what it felt for me,
I've
is that,
always liked
yeah.
that. I've always liked that metaphor. Come back to your natural inclination to be comfortable in your own skin, to not live in fear, but in love. That's always been what's spoken deepest to me.
Yeah, because everything's there, right? Trust, um, truth, beauty, stillness, peace, like everything is in that home that we become aware of. And it's just the most comfortable place, right?
Uh, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Well, this has
Uh,
been great. I've really enjoyed doing this with you, Laura.
yeah, thank you. Me too, Dicken. Me too.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And I want to talk briefly, because you do mentoring. You have your website is threeprinciplesmentoring.com. So if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can check out your website. Also, you can, I'll post your email as well, so you don't have to mention that. I'll also post links to your book on Audible and Amazon, and your YouTube channel as well, so that everybody has your contact information if they'd like to reach out to you. Dickon, is there anything else that you would like to add, just in closing, to listeners out there that are on this life journey, this vast life journey, and they struggle, the ups and the downs and the
Mm.
ins and outs, and we're all human, right? We're all having this human experience, and you've helped us understand a little bit more about how we're built. So I appreciate that. But is there anything else you would like to shine light on or share?
The very first paper I wrote about the principles is Life is Easier Than You Think. And now I'm writing my second book with my good friend Natasha Sverdlov in Denmark. And we're thinking of calling it Living a Life of Ease. because that's really when you get your resilience back and you have deep faith and trust in your innate well-being and wisdom, you do. Anyone can begin to live a life of ease.
Yeah.
No exceptions.
No exceptions. It's beautifully said. And it's so worth it because it's so pleasurable. Like, why wouldn't, well, I don't want to say why wouldn't we, but we can. It's
Yeah,
available.
yeah, it is.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here, Dicken.
Thank you,
And
Laura. You're a
yeah,
delight. It's been really wonderful. You are do a really good interview. Let me tell you, it was a great conversation.
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dicken. Well, um, yeah. Well, thank you very much. And to everybody listening, we'll see you next time.
Bye bye.
Bye.